Hello, guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures. So, today we're having playing Planet Zoo. So, this is going to be part 116 of our Planet Zoo mod spotlights, where we take a look at some of the wonderful mods people be making and compare and talk about the wonderful biodiversity that we share our world with. So, today we've got a lot of new species, which is really awesome. We've got a couple of updates as well, but a lot of new species today, and a lot of mods. Our older modders are starting to come back a bit and make some things. So we're going to be starting off today with a wonderful bird done by Ginger Toast. We have got the Wattled crane, so let's have a wonderful look at these guys. So the Wattled crane, really awesome animal. So these guys, the scientific name is Gurus Cariolata, or Cariolata, I believe you say that. So these guys are a threatened and quite big species of crane. They're typically found in the wetlands and grasslands of eastern and southern Africa. And they get quite big too, so they typically range in height from about 150 to 175 centimeters, or about 4'11" to 5'9" feet in height, and actually the second tallest crane in the world, after the Saurus crane from India. And is also the largest flying bird native to Australia, third only to the large species of ostriches as the largest bird in Africa. So definitely a big animal. So you can see the wattle crane is taller, and you can see it's actually quite gracile. It's got quite a slim beak and slender head and neck and legs, so quite a tall, slender animal. And is the heaviest on average of several large species of waders in Africa. It's actually the fourth heaviest African flying bird, after the great white pelican, the koi bustard, and the Cape vulture. So generally, their wingspan gets between 230 to 260 centimeters, or about 7'7" inches, 8'6" inches, typically with a body length of about 3'7" to 4'7", or 110 to 140 centimeters, and typically will weigh between 6.4 and 8.2 kilograms, or about 14 to 18 pounds. And females and males get a little bit bigger, so about 7.5 to 9 kilograms, or about 17 to 20 pounds in males. So males, as I mentioned, a little bit bigger. Be really cool animals. You can see they are not too different in look than most of the cranes, but what really sets them apart is that they've got these kind of large wattles that come down here with the colours there, so that kind of what gives them their name, that wattled crane. But in terms of colours, you can see there's kind of that white dark patch around the shoulders there that extends down the body down here. They've got a little bit of red on the face with the wattle, typically white nape and chest, and a little bit of a grey crown, and a little bit more greyish down the back of the body there. But yeah, really cool. So as I mentioned, these guys are from Africa. They live in eastern and southern Africa, with an isolated population in Ethiopia. And more than half of the world's wattled cranes live in Zambia. And the single largest concentration is the Okavango Delta in Botswana. And they've been sighted actually in Uganda for the first time in 2011, seen in the Kimbumba rice region on the eastern side of the country. And the sighting brings the total number of birds species in Uganda to 1,040, so that's pretty cool. And there was actually a new population discovered in Angola as well, so that's quite cool, in 2018. So in terms of their habitats and diet, these guys typically like to live in fairly inaccessible wetlands under most conditions. So they're like marshy habitats with like sedge-based vegetation as well. They're also omnivorous, so they will the principal food they'll eat is like mainly aquatic, so they'll eat ribosomes and tubers and even like water lilies and stuff. And actually one of the more herbivorous out of the crane species. And the other portion of their diet's a lot of insects, but they will supplement it with snails, amphibians, and snakes when they get a chance. As they kind of forage through the shallow water with their bill. Very typical of other cranes as well, but they're more herbivorous. In terms of behavior, there does seem to be some seasonal movement between them, but it's not really well known. So mainly probably due to local conditions. So if there's a flood or weather conditions, they'll move around. And the number of wattle cranes can increase during local floods so much as 3,000 individuals, where they'll often fly out. There doesn't seem to be more of a fixed migration pattern. They just kind of go around where the food is. And there have been some migrational movement between the high and low plateaus of Mozambique, for example. And somewhat gregarious outside the breeding season, they can live in groups of up to 10 birds, but have been sighted in groups of nearly 90 birds. The crown cranes will occasionally interact, but given these guys are largely terrestrial, while these guys like wetlands, they're typically not really found. They'll often be found with other species of birds and share higher habitat and dietary preferences. So, like leshways and spur-ringed goose will hang around with them, but they usually can be found in slightly deeper water. And wattled cranes will commence their breeding season around April. Most nests are quite sloppy, and they're like crushed impressions in grass and border on marsh. And they may use also old spur-winged goose nest when they get a chance. And each egg, we'll have a look at the cute little babies. Each egg is typically laid 3 weeks after the nest is built. And the average clutch size is actually seen to be the smallest of any of the world's cranes, with an average of 1.6 eggs, so typically only 1 or 2 eggs. Even if there are 2 eggs, usually only one chick will fledge successfully, so having 2 babies in one go is kind of a bit rare. And the incubation typically lasts between 33 to 36 days, and is on average the longest of any crane, and both parents will participate to raise the baby. As the chicks are immediately fed by both parents, they take shift, and at around 80 days of age, the chick starts to forage with their parents. At the first sign of danger, the parents will force the young into tall grasses to hide, and the fledging period, so before it starts to be able to fly, is about 100 to 150 days, the longest of any crane, and the young will remain with their parents for up to a year when the next breeding season starts, and they may gather in flocks with lots of unrelated juveniles. So in terms of their threats, they are a vulnerable species, and they're very susceptible to destruction of like wetland habitats, which is the most significant threat to them. So degradation of habitats, things like building hydroelectric power plants and things like that, and dams hurt these guys as well, because they rely on the floodplains that these large rivers usually feed. And human livestock also is a big issue. Tsetse flies, spraying for that. Illegal collection of their eggs and adults for food. Power line collisions, livestock disturbance. Is a quite significant threat throughout the range of the wattled crane. But luckily there are protections in place, and they are considered vulnerable by the IUCN. So then definitely still a lot of them, but they're definitely facing some issues. But yeah, really, really cool bird. Ginger Toast really did a wonderful job with this one. So next up, we have got the Emperor Tamarin done by Leaf and Jen. Really, really awesome little guy here. So, the Emperor Tamarin, or Sagittus imperator, these guys are a species of tamarin monkey found. They were named because their resemblance to the German Emperor Wilhelm II, and they live in the northern Brazil states of Acre and Amazonas, and the southwestern Amazon basin in Peru and Bolivia. So, the fur of these guys is primarily grey, but they have yellowish specks on the chest and kind of a yellowish tail as well. They have a long... The hands and feet are typically black, and then the tail is like a bit brownish. And outstanding, they've got these long white beards going on here. Sometimes little mustache as well. And the animal can reach a length of about 23 to 26 centimeters in length, about 9 to 10 inches, with a 35 to 41 centimeter or 13 to 16 inch tail, and weigh about 500 grams. So there are kind of 2 subspecies. There's the Sagittus imperator, which is the typed one, which is the black-chinned Emperor Tamarin, and then there's Sagittus imperator syringenius, which is the beard Emperor Tamarin, with the one with the beard. So this is the one you can see as a beard. So this is the bearded Tamarin. So we'll talk about that. So very similar. Mainly the main difference is the beard. There's some small color differences and things like that, but mostly that's the main way to tell them apart. So these are Emperor Tamarins. So these guys typically live in Amazonian lowlands and lower mountain rainforests and like remnant primary and secondary forests. And the lowlands kind of hold an abundance of water due to high sea levels, so they like to have a very humid climate year round. And then that's why they're primarily considered tropical and things like that. And during the dry season, actually flowering peaks in the wet season and foraging decreases, so that kind of affects the diets of tamarins. And many tamarins are found in secondary forests, which occupy about 40% of the forest area that they live in. And they often will accumulate woody plants at a rapid rate and have complex things going on. Typically, these guys live in groups of about 2 to 8 members, but can range from 4 to 18. They reside in kind of an extended family group, usually with only one breeding female. And the groups usually only consist of emperor tamarins, but they can include other species like the saddleback tamarin in these groups, and they will forage together and things like that, so that's really, really cool. but they will kind of segregate each other. So the emperor tamarins will tend to stay higher in the canopy than 10 meters, and the saddleback tamarins usually stay below 10 meters. So it's kind of segregation within the habitat. And these guys consume a wide array of specimens of food. They'll eat fruit and flowers, which are really available during like the wet season. They'll also eat scums and saps, which are gorged out from the trees they're living in. Also insects and frogs, depending on what habitats. And they've actually been seen to engage with mixed species associations with saddleback tamarins, and they'll forage with them as well. And typically they are feed on a dominant space hierarchy. So basically there's like a top based on a dominant hierarchy led by a dominant female and her mates. So it's kind of an alpha pair. The dominant emperor tamarin who forms these groups, forming this mixed species, is beneficial for the tamarins as they're better able to find food resources and things like that. And yeah, really, really cool. And in terms, obviously having these bigger groups actually helps with protection, things like that. And they follow the saddlebacks and using their larger size to intimidate the mixed predators, things like that, since the saddleback's a little bit bigger. Use that to intimidate predators. So yeah, really, really weird and interesting beneficial relationship there. So in terms of their kind of care, reproduction. So these guys, the age of typically first reproduction is about 16 to 20 months, and the gestation period can last for about 6 months. And they're also seasonal breeders, so breeding is typically based on food availability, with most birds occurring towards the wet season, where there's lots of food and things like that, of course. So tamarins were once thought to be a monogamous species, but observation of emperor tamarins show that they are polyandrous, so they would have one dominant female mating with multiple males, so she's kind of the big boss. And due to high rates of twinning and multiple birthing, the parental care and parental investment can be quite good for survival. So if the dominant female has 2 babies, often the group will help take care of her baby, things like that, so that really helps her in survival. But because obviously they're born quite big and like a large energy cost of taking care of 2 big babies. And other females help take care of it, and then obviously as they get older, the females will go off and will make their own group if they don't want to be subordinate to the female. And infant mortality is actually quite high when it's between weeks 5 and 15 of their lives, where they begin to move around and explore. And one of their greatest strengths is falling from the canopy and dying because of the fall. But in terms of distribution, these guys can be found in Brazil, places in Peru and Bolivia. Quite an interesting range. And this subspecies, I see in Imperator Sorigenius. So these guys can be found in the Jura River and the Miramar River as well. So in terms of behavior, these guys are gregarious, playful, and in the wild they can be very social and interactable with humans. So that's why quite common in captivity. And typically they have all sorts of different communications, like sounds and mannerisms, to be able to communicate with each other, especially like dominance hierarchies and other groups and things like that. So kind of working that out like most primates do, with kind of communication being quite important in that regard. So they'll use all sorts of like clicks and high sounds that even we can't hear to be able to communicate with each other. And of course they'll often live with these saddleback tamarins and kind of make mixed relationships with that species. And in terms of their conservation, these guys are listed as least concern, luckily, as there's no really big conservation effort directed at these tamarins. But the main things that affects these guys could, of course, affect anything that lives in the Amazon rainforest. Habitat degradation and fragmentation is a big issue, so which restricts their populations. And there are places like in their range that are being protected to try and maintain good populations of these guys, so they don't become vulnerable or endangered, of course. And they are commonish in zoos. They are held in captivity. Actually, my local zoo has a few in New Zealand. Really, really cool animals. I love emperor tamarins. But yeah, they are generally pretty good, and they can be relatively easy to care for, so it's quite good. They love to be stroked by humans and things like that in some regards, but a lot of zoos kind of refrain from touching animals these days unless it's necessary. But yeah, really, really cool. Nice little one. So that was again done by Leaf and Jen. So next up, we have got another animal by Leaf and Jen. We have got the wonderful rodent this time. That's not what we want to look at. We want to look at you. This is the Indian giant squirrel. So the Indian giant squirrel, or also known as the Malabar giant squirrel, or Rafuta indica, these guys are large, multicolored tree squirrel, as you kind of see here, that live that are endemic to the forests and woodlands of India, and they are diurnal, so they come out during the day, arboreal, so they like to hang out in the trees, and also mainly herbivorous, so they feed mostly on plants and nuts and seeds and things. So these guys are endemic to India, so they can be found from the Western Ghats and the Eastern Ghats and the Sapara Range, and can be found at high altitudes in sorts of tropical and semi-deciduous, and also like woodlands and things like that. So generally anywhere with trees, they'll be fine. They generally like to make nests in taller trees up to about 11 meters in height, in order to avoid predators. And in terms of description, they're one of the largest squirrels, which probably was why they were put in the game. Very big animals, so these guys can reach a head to body length of about 25 to 50 centimeters, so between 10 inches and about 1 foot 8 inches. And the tail tends to be somewhat longer than that, and then they can weigh up between 1.5 to 2 kilograms, or 3.3 to 4.4 pounds. They can really get up to about 6 pounds, or about 3 kilograms. But the average length for both sexes and head to body length is 36 centimeters, or about 1 foot 2 inches, and 45 centimeters, 1.6 for tail length. So generally about 36 centimeters head to body, 45 centimeters in tail length, and about 1.7 to 1.8 kilograms of weight. So, or about 3.7 to 4 pounds. So definitely about average there. As you can see, they kind of have this two-toned coat to them. You can see that it's very dark, but they also have the yellowish bits around, especially this orange bit around their face and hands. So you kind of see the changes there. And they have ranges because there are some subspecies that have been identified, but generally there's like about 4 different ones that have different colors and things like that. This one is just indica, so that's the type subspecies that's known. So in terms of behavior, these guys are a canopy or upper canopy dwelling species. They rarely leave the trees, and they require tall branching trees to construct their nests. So they travel from tree to tree and jump up to 6 meters, or about 20 feet. And when in danger, they'll often freeze or flatten themselves against a tree trunk, with their main predators being birds of prey like owls and things like leopards, where they can get eaten by them. They're most active during the day, or like in the early hours of the morning and evening, and they typically rest during the midday, and they're typically solitary and only come together to breed. They're also believed to have quite a substantial role in creating and changing ecosystems, because they move around seeds, and their diets includes flowers, fruits, nuts, and tree bark, with some subspecies potentially being omnivorous and eating insect and bird eggs, but probably all of them do. In terms of family life, they tend to live alone or in pairs. So very interesting in that regard. They build large globular nests out of twigs and leaves, and they place them on thinner branches where large predators can't get to them. And the nests can become conspicuous in deciduous forest in the dry season. And the individuals may build several nests in a small area of forest where they use to sleep, but also use them as a nursery. So we don't know much about the breeding of these guys, but due to the Malayan giant squirrel, it's believed that they give birth to about March, April, September, and December. And the young will typically weigh between 74 grams at birth and get up to a length about 27.3 centimeters. And in Canada, the Indian giant squirrel has been spotted with young in March, so seems to be about right. So March, April, September, December, around that, which is really, really cool. Definitely a really cool animal. Never expected to see a big rodent like this in the game, like a big squirrel. It's really nice to get it. This is one in like Jen's backlog because she recently left the community, so Leaf's kind of putting out all her mods for her, which is really, really cool. Nice to see these guys get a release. Really, really awesome. So next up, we've got another one that's come back from the dead, been edited a bit. We have got by Doc 589, Genora Pizza and Buffzoo. We have got the Tylosaurus. So we can see some changes there, obviously changes in the textures, things like that. Thought it'd be worth covering. So Tylosaurus, which means kind of protuberance lizard, so basically the knob lizard, you could say. So these are a genus of mosasaur, which were a group of large reptiles, large lizards, that were adapted for living in the oceans, and they lived during the kind of mid to late Cretaceous. Very, very interesting group of animals. So they were the third kind of genus named after Cydestes and Platycarpus, and was first found in Kansas. And after that, there's been all sorts of different species and ones found across the world. But the species this is based on is the type species Tylosaurus progenitor, which is believe typically found in like the Western Interior Seaway and around America, so quite a wide range there. So in terms of their description, so they were considered one of the largest mosasaurs, and one of the things that sets them apart is that the kind of teeth don't go right to the end of the skull there. You can see there's a bit of a knob there, which shows them apart, and it's believed they may have used this for ramming into prey or even into each other in fights, as we'll get into. So that's where kind of they get their name from, Tylosaurus. They have about 24 to 26 teeth in the upper jaw, 20 to 22 teeth in the palate, 26 teeth in lower jaw, and 29 to 30 vertebrae between that. So they do have 2 rows of teeth, as you can kind of see in there, which is really, really interesting. So in terms of size, they were one of the largest mosasaurs. The largest known specimen, which is the same species this guy, T. progenitor, these guys' nicknames Bunker, they get to about 2.12 to 15... 8 meters long, so about 39 to 52 feet. And that is kind of considered the biggest, though there have been some kind of change in estimates in and around there. So that's kind of the smallest estimate's 12 meters, biggest is 15. But these guys weren't quite as heavy. I believe they've been estimated at kind of like maybe up to 10 tons or 8 tons. Not very big, like they weren't big and bulky like whales, but still definitely some really big animals. And in terms of coloration, there's been some fossil evidence actually found in Tylosaurus that have been form of scales. So we know what their scales were like, and they had very small rhomboidal scales that were in rows. They were quite similar to modern rattlesnakes, but they were much smaller compared to their body, so they would have almost looked smooth if you looked at them from a distance. With the individual being 5 meters long, having scales between 2 to 3 millimeters, that kind of shows how they would look. So they almost look like a shark's tentacles. And looking at some species of Tylosaurus showed that they may have had a counter shading in life. So a lot of animals, they will have a dark top and a light bottom. So that allows them to kind of hide their outline, which is good for camouflage. It's a common thing in a lot of animals and breaks their outline, which is really, really cool. So in terms of taxonomy, these guys are in the family Mosasauridae and kind of in the superfamily. And they have their own little subfamily called the Tylosaurines, where they live with animals such as Tanipharosaurus and Kaikaifilu, as you guys know from Prehistoric Planet, kind of live in that group. And there's a few different species of mosasaurs, as I mentioned. Tylosaurus progenitor is kind of in the middle of that, interestingly. And we know a lot about these guys. There's been lots of research looking into how they grow over time. So baby mosasaurs would have the kind of classic snout protuberance was present in juveniles, and they kind of acquired that snout projection early in life, and it seems like they didn't use that big knob to anything for sexual selection, which is quite cool. I don't know why none of you guys are swimming. You should go for a swim. I want to see you swim. But this is the albino female. This is kind of the basic one. We'll have a look at you. I know you're not swimming, but we'll be fine. Let's just say they're breached. We also did some research into their metabolism. So although most squire mates and of course are cold-blooded ectotherms, these guys have been warm-blooded, it seems. The only known other lizard is the black and white tegu, which is partly endothermic. But these guys, looking at isotopes and things like that, suggest these guys were very similar in to kind of like birds and things like that. And dinosaurs and being warm-blooded, so they were able to better maintain their own body temperature, which is good for animals that live out in the ocean and being able, because ocean takes a lot of heat out of the water, takes a lot of heat out of your skin and things like that, and allows you to live in cooler waters and dive deeper, things like that. So it seems that they would have had like an average body temperature of about 34.3 degrees or 93 degrees Fahrenheit, which is much higher than like Toxicales, which is a turtle, and Encotus, which is a fish, and more comparable to that of Ichthyornis, which is a bird. So very interesting in that regard. And some other interesting things about these guys is they were believed to be anguilliform swimmers, so swim very much like eels, where they had this long paddle tail like an eel, and they used to swim like almost like a snake. But more recent research and like preserved fossils and things like that, they all kind of showed that they had this long paddle tail like this and a lobe that came down, very similar to like ichthyosaurs and sharks and whales. So that showed that these guys were quite good swimmers. And it also seemed these guys were very well adapted for ambush, so they were quite lightweight for a mosasaur of its length. So these guys would have been able to kind of move quite fast and at a rapid speed, and being able to kind of go up and then attack their prey, which is quite cool. And in terms of feeding, we do have, because they're large size, we do have, we can assume these guys were large apex predators. And we have some animals like the diving bird Hesperornis, which got to about 2 meters long, and a type of fish called Bagnothenomus, things like that. And possibly a shark found in the stomach of a specimen of T. progenitor. But other species, like even smaller mosasaurs, other marine reptiles like Dolichoryncops and things like that have been found in stomachs of mosasaurs. So they were particularly eating like large fish, marine birds, even smaller mosasaurs were definitely on the menu for these guys, which is quite interesting. And there actually seem to be bite marks on a dinosaur skeleton from a mosasaur, which is really, really interesting. And in terms of their social behavior, this is one thing I was going to mention. It seems like there have been mosasaurs preserved with bite marks on their heads, and they've been healed. So it's likely they got into fights with other mosasaurs, which most likely have been due to courtship or territorial displays. We really don't know. It seems like that knob wasn't for sexual selection, or sexual competition. So it may have just been competing for food and territories or something like that. And we do have evidence of like pathologies in there because we have so many mosasaurs. We can see some that have all sorts of like injuries and things like that. We actually have one from decompression illness where they kind of show that they nitrogen kind of builds up in their blood, and that can hurt their kind of bones, and that's kind of considered called the bends. So that's something that can happen for repeated diving, things like that. It's common in aquatic animals. But yeah, really, really cool in that regard. Again, done by Doc589, Genora Pizza and Buffsu. So let's see if we're going to get them to swim. I kind of want to see them swim, but I don't know why they're hanging around here all the time. I should be able to get in there. I just want to see them in their proper habitat, because we were talking about them on land. They were in this... they must be basking or something. Let's see if they can actually get in. Let's see. Yeah, they can get in there. This shouldn't be drama. Probably just waiting for food. Anyway, that's mosasaurs. We can see this one's an albino. And this one has got the breeding colors from the one prehistoric planet. But all different colors, which are all really, really nice. I just want to see you swim. I want to show you off to the wonderful, adoring public that want to see you guys swim, but you guys are kind of resting on land. In real life, mosasaurs wouldn't come on land like this. It's just of course, the crocodile rig that these guys are on. You can't really make them go around like that, of course. So let's see if we can, maybe we can try and move it. Let's see. Come on, do it for me, pretty please. It's because you're my best friend. Oh, it's starting to come back. Oh, nah. We'll give up. We'll give up on these guys. They seem to not want to swim at the moment. But anyway, nice to show them off. I really hope these get ported to Jurassic World Evolution 2 again, because these were quite nice. I'd really love to see that in the proper lagoon. So that's another species that's been done. Another prehistoric one. We've got another one coming up. So this one I'm quite excited to talk about. We've got Diplocaulus. So this is from the Cretaceous into the Carboniferous. In Permian, we've got Diplocaulus. A really, really cool animal. This was done by TNT and Leaf. So these guys are an extinct genus of leptospondyle amphibian. So these guys lived in the late Carboniferous to late Permian in North America and Africa. And they are by far the largest and well-known leptospondyle kind of amphibian. And they're characterized, you can see there, by that really big, like horns coming out the skull, that boomerang shape to the head. And remains attributed to late Permian ones of Morocco, have been considered the youngest known occurrence of a leptospondyle. So you can see these guys are quite as stocky and quite salamander-like, but they're relatively large. They get up to about 1 meter long. Although a complete tail is unknown for the genus, there's a nearly articulated specimen found in 1917 that was formed a row vertebrae near the head as well. So we kind of know what they kind of look like. And it seemed they swam in a very much eel-like movement with their long tail, which is quite interesting. But you can see that most distinctive feature are these large horns here. So the thing that really makes it famous and weird, it's got these very large horns, very much like a boomerang shape, it's often called. And we don't know exactly why they had that. So some people have been suggesting these guys would have been used to like support like phalange, large skin, like flaps on them. Some think they could be for jousting, things like that. But we really don't know why they had this. Could be something like sexual selection. And there's a few species known, but this species is also called the giant Diplocaulus. The Diplocaulus magnicornis, if you say that. So these guys were described by Cope, if you know the Cope of the Bone Wars, in 1882. So these guys are by far the most common and well-described member of this genus. And they're first known from more vertebrae, but they've been shown that these guys may have had a very bizarre longhorn amphibian, which is quite interesting. And there's been hundreds of specimens found throughout Texas and Oklahoma, so it would have been quite common when it was alive, it seems. They live in good habitats to be preserved. So the function of the horns, some people think they would have protected external gills. Some people think they may have just been maladaptive or a counterweight to help push their body down and make them heavier. Some have suggested these guys could have like skin flaps that would have assisted the animal, very much like a skate or a stingray, like motion. And this was entirely conjectural because we haven't found one in soft tissue, so we don't really know. But there's also other functions like a burrowing tool and things like that. That's kind of one thing that people have been talking about. And also lift. Lift is another thing. It believed it could be a hydrofoil. So that means that would have helped them in the water basically come up and be able to generate lift so they wouldn't sink. They would come up and be able to generate lift, and almost like the pectoral fins of a shark, because sharks will sink in the water unless they have their pectoral fins kind of pushing them up. This kind of could be the same thing going on with these guys. And even would have helped them be able to chase prey potentially and things like that, and be able to like move swiftly, which is quite interesting. And in terms of paleoecology, we actually have a trio of 3 juvenile Diplocolus found in a burrow of 8, with the +1 juvenile urops, were found being partially eaten by the sailback synapsid Dimetrodon, so that's quite interesting, which is believed to have digged up these little amphibians during a drought. And one of the 3 was killed with a bite to the head and took portions of the brain and the skull, which would have been an injury, that fatal injury, so the animal would have died before getting fossilized. So that's quite interesting. But yeah, really, really cool animal. I love seeing more extinct animals, especially a very interesting amphibian, Diplocolus. Definitely a big fan. So we'll have a look at the little baby here. Was a little baby. You can see that over here. Very much a little cutie. So this was again done by TNT and Leaf. TNT always does some really, really awesome extinct mods. So I'm really, really happy with that. So next up, we got by Narwhaler, we have got the Agnar. So this has been a remake. So this is put back on the Somali Wild Ass model. So we got kind of a remaster. So the Agnar, also known as the Hermine or the Asiatic Wild Ass, these guys are a member of the horse native to Asia. So they are quite a bit larger than the African wild ass. These guys get to about 290 kilograms or about 640 pounds at about 2.1 meters or 6 feet 9 inches at body length. They're typically, as you can see here, reddish to brown or yellowish brown and have broad dorsal stripes on the middle of their back. And unlike most horses and donkeys, these guys were actually never domesticated. They're also one of the fastest mammals and can run at about 64 kilometers an hour or about 40 miles per hour to 70 kilometers per hour, 43 miles per hour, which is quite interesting. And the Agnar is closely related to the African wild ass, and the Kiang, which was probably used to be considered a subspecies, is now a distinct species. So there are a few different subspecies. There's kind of the Mongolian wild ass, the Turkmenistan Kulan, the Persian wild ass, the Indian wild ass, and some extinct ones like the European wild ass and the Syrian wild ass. So there are different subspecies, but this is just referred to as the Agnar. So this is just the species itself. So in terms of characteristics, I mentioned quite big, and male Agnars are usually quite a bit bigger than the females. And in terms of habitat, these guys love to live in desert plains, semi-deserts, oases, arid grasslands, savanna scrublands, and mountain ranges, steppes, things like that. And they've actually been, the Turkmenistan and Mongolian wild asses have been known to live in hot and cooler deserts. And the ICN estimates their population about 28,000 individuals which remain in the wild, which classes them as near threatened, as we'll get into. During the late Pleistocene, so about 40,000 years ago, these guys would have ranged from Europe into southwest and northwestern Asia, and they seem to be regionally extinct in Palestine, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Jordan, Syria, and the southern reaches of Siberia, which is quite interesting. The Mongolian wild ass lives in deserts and mountains around Mongolia, and they're considered the most common subspecies, but population has declined due to poaching and habitat loss. And the Indian wild ass is found throughout India and Pakistan, with about 4,000 of them known, with a few very hot wild sanctuaries having them. So they are protected in some areas, and that's why they're considered near threatened. There's still quite a few of them, but they are something that people like, and there's still a risk of extinction, of course. So in terms of social structure, these guys are social animals, so stallions are entirely solitary or live in groups of 2 to 3, with females living in herds, and males are typically observed holding harems of females. But other ones, it seems to be dominant stallions kind of defending territory. So it kind of be a mix of both. Differences in behavior can likely be due to like climate, vegetation cover, and hunting and predation, so on. And it can vary widely, which is quite interesting. So some places they will adopt the harem type group, and others will maintain territories. It just really depends. Agnars usually can form large groups of up to like 450 to 1,200 individuals, but usually that only occurs in places with food or water sources, so they will climate together. And as these larger groups dissolve again within the day, and they kind of move on to their own thing. And young male Agnars will form these little bachelor groups during the winter, and this is quite similar to like plain and mountain zebras, which is quite interesting. In terms of reproduction, and as we talk about reproduction, we're going to talk about this cute little baby. So in terms of reproduction, these guys are herbivorous, so they feed on grasses, herbs, leaves, fruits, and things like that. And they browse on shrubs and trees and in dry habitats. And during the winter, these guys will they eat snow for for water as well, which is quite interesting. And they'll dig up riverbeds, things like that. In terms of reproduction, they reach sexual maturity at about 2 years of age, and their first mating will typically take place when they're about 3 or 4. And breeding is seasonal, and the gestation period for these guys is about 11 months. So the birth will last a little more than 10 minutes, with mating and birth occurring between April and September, and accumulation from June to July. The mating season is the raining season in India, and the foal can pretty much stand and run after its parents about 15 to 20 minutes after being born. And females with young tend to form groups of up to 5 females, and during rearing, the foal and dam will remain close, but other animals and her own offspring are kind of displaced by the dam. Occasionally, stallions of territorial wild populations will expel the young to mate with the mare again, but that's not too common. And wild asses in the wild can live up to 14 years, but in captivity they can live up to 26 years. Quite long-lived. So in terms of predation, these guys are pretty much safe from most things, but they're preyed upon by animals such as Persian leopards and striped hyenas, with a few cases of them being preyed upon by leopards in Iran. And though leopards do not usually feed on equids in Africa, these guys, the Persian leopards are typically a little bit larger and stronger, so they may prey upon these asses. And during the Middle East and in the Indian subcontinent, they'll also be preyed upon by Asiatic lions and tigers. Also, formerly, when they used to be around, cheetahs, dholes, and bears, that they mostly would have preyed on foals. Also, India, they could be eaten by mugger crocodiles. And currently, the main predator for these guys are grey wolves. So they'll be hunted by grey wolves in places like India and Mongolia as well, so that's where their main predator. And in terms of threats, the greatest threats for the Agnar are things like poaching for their meat and hides. In some areas, they're usually used for traditional medicine, which is high threats for like the Mongolian wild ass. Overgrazing as well by livestock and herders and things like that. Also, spreading of diseases like the South African horse sickness actually caused a major decline in the Indian wild ass population in the 1960s, but that can be a big threat from spreading from domestic into wild populations. But in terms of conservation, they've been some of the populations, such as the Persian Agnar and the Turkmenistan Kulan, have been reintroduced into parts of their former range, which is really, really cool. And there's populations in captivity of people breeding them, trying to save them as well. And potentially could reintroduce them into wild as well. So there's lots of conservation in these guys as well. And they have a quite interesting relationship to humans. They were notoriously difficult to tame, apparently. So equids were used in the HSM now to pull wagons, but they were basically donkeys, but it's not Agnars because of that shoulder stripe. However, people look at these guys and they may have potentially been like tamed occasionally, but they weren't domesticated like African wild asses were. But yeah, really, really cool animal. How could not love an Agnar? And Narwhal did a wonderful job with that. So last but certainly not least, we've got another animal done by Narwhal. Very interesting for our lucky last one. We have got the Garanuk. Really, really cool animal. Let's have a look at this wonderful Garanuk that he made. Really, really awesome animal. So the Garanuk, also known as the giraffe gazelle, is a long-necked, medium-sized antelope found in East Africa, and the sole member of its genus Lithocranius, and was first described by 1879 by Victor Brook. And these guys, there's two subspecies, but they're often just considered either independent species, like the northern and southern Garanuk, or sometimes just considered as one. And they're closely related to the springbok, believe it or not. That's their closest living relatives. So you can see they don't look that similar to springbok, but very interesting. That's what taxonomy shows. So they're a very tall, slender antelope that actually resembles gazelles quite a lot. And they have long, slender limbs and long neck and things like that. With males typically being about 89 to 105 centimeters, or about 35 to 41.5 inches tall, with the females being about 80 to 100 centimeters, or about 31 to 39 inches tall, with the head to body length typically between 140 to 160 centimeters, or 55 to 63 inches. Males will typically weigh between 31 to 52 kilograms, or 68 to 150 pounds, with females being lighter between 28 to 45 kilograms, or about 60 to 99 pounds. That's where they kind of mix as well. They have two types of colorations. They kind of have that smooth coat that is like a reddish brown with a saddle on it. And you can see the underbelly is quite a bit lighter. And they have larger horns. These males have larger horns. You can see that there. They're like an S shape, and they can measure between 25 or 44 centimeters, or about 10 to 17.5 inches. And they seem quite similar. They resemble the Detabang, or Dibtabang, if you say that. And which lives with it in parts of like eastern and central Somalia and southwestern Ethiopia. Both are brachydonts, and they have lots of kind of similar features. Suggest they may have a similar ecology, but they do different things. In terms of their ecology, these guys are diurnal, so they're active mainly during the day, but they typically around noon now will kind of rest in the shade and things like that. Foraging and feeding is a major activity throughout the day, with females spending a longer time feeding. The Garanuk may expose itself to rain as well to help cool its body. Social structures are typically small herds of between 2 to 6, and herds typically comprise of a single sex, though female herds will have juveniles, and some males will be completely solitary. Fighting and travel are uncommon. They prefer to run away rather than fighting. And both sexes maintain home ranges about 3 to 6 kilometers, or about 1 to 2.5 square miles that actually overlap. And males will have a scent marked. They usually mark their territories with a preorbital gland that'll release like scents and things like that. And that's where they mark their territories. And typically their diet, and these guys are browsers. So unlike a lot of antelope and gazelles, they're typically grazers. These guys are browsers. So the Garanuk will feed on trees and shoots, herbs, flowers, and fruits. And they actually can reach higher branches much better than the gazelles because they can stand erect on their hind feet to be able to get higher. And they can reach over 2 meters off the ground using this. And they'll feed on acacia, things like that. So it's a really interesting way that these guys manage to kind of set themselves apart and feed on a different food than a lot of antelope just by reaching higher than everyone else by getting on their back legs. That's really, really cool. And they do not drink water regularly, which is another interesting thing. And major predators for these guys include African wild dogs, cheetahs, hyenas, lions, and leopards. So let's have a look at the reproduction of these guys as we have a look at the cute little babies. Let's have a look at these little goobers. So Garanuk reproduce throughout the year. So females reach sexual maturity about 1 year of age, and males about 1.5 years. Though they only seem to start breeding once they maintain their territory, so probably about 3.5 years of age. A gestation period for these guys is about 7 months, and are typically born one at a time, and they typically will be born at about 3 kilograms or 7 pounds. One cool thing as well is offspring were actually produced by artificial insemination for the first time in the White Oak Conservation Zoo in kind of Yulee, Florida, with 4 female calves born, and one of the 4 was later inseminated successfully by the Wild Oak and SCZ CESARC, which is the Southeast Zoo Alliance for Reproduction and Conservation, which created a second generation of calves born from artificial selection, which is quite cool. And in captivity, these guys can live up to about 13 years, but they can live at least 8 years in the wild, so interesting in that regard. Oh, that's not what we wanted to do. We'll have a look at the female. So here's, oh, that's the male again. Have a look at the female. So the female doesn't quite have these big horns. Still really, really nice, regardless. But yeah, this was again done by Narwhalo, who really did a wonderful job. How can you not? Narwhalo always kicks it up the park with some wonderful mods. But yeah, I think this is about it for today. All mods been covered. So, of course, thanks to everyone who made these mods. It's a really, really awesome job. So, yeah, I really, really, really hope you guys have enjoyed this video. I hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to hit the little bell icon to get notified of anything. So yeah, hope you guys enjoy this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe. And bye-bye.